So, newspapers as a form of mass media. As late as the early 1800s, newspapers were still quite expensive to print and it was limited to all those elite readers. And then we have the birth of newspaper for masses, the penny press. In 1833, September 1833, when Benjamin Day created the Sun, which was printed on small letter-sized pages. It was just sold just for a penny. And with the Industrial Revolution in full swing, Benjamin Day employed the new steam-driven two-cylinder press to print the Sun. And the Sun sought out stories that would appeal to the new mainstream consumer. As such, the paper primarily published all those human interest stories and police reports, and there were ample room for advertisements. Benjamin Day's adoption of this new format and the industrialized method of printing, they were huge success, and the Sun became the first paper to be printed by what became known as the penny press. Before the emergence of penny press, the most popular newspaper was New York City's Courier and Enquirer, which sold only 4,500 copies per day, while the Sun, by 1835, the Sun was sold 15,000 copies per day. And another successful penny press, penny paper was James Gordon Bennett's New York Morning Herald, which was first published in 1835. And Bennett made his mark on the publishing industry by offering non-partisan political reporting. He also introduced more aggressive methods for gathering news, like hiring both interviewers and foreign correspondents. And his paper was the first to send a reporter to a crime scene to witness an investigation. In the 1860s, Bennett hired around 63 war reporters to cover the US Civil War. Although this newspaper, New York Morning Herald, initially emphasized all those sensational news, it later became one of the country's most respected papers for its accurate reporting. Here we'll be talking about growth of wire services. It is another major historical technological breakthrough for newspapers when Samuel Morse invented the telegraph. Newspapers turned to emerging telegraph companies to receive up-to-date news briefs from cities across the globe. The significant expense of this service led to the formation of what is known as Associated Press (AP) in 1846 as a cooperative arrangement of 5 major New York papers, that is New York Sun, the Journal of Commerce, the Courier and Enquirer, and the New York Herald. The success of this Associated Press led to the development of wire services between major cities in USA. And according to Associated Press, this meant that editors were able to actively collect news as it broke rather than gather already published news. This collaboration between papers allowed for more reliable reporting, and the increased breadth of subject matter lent subscribing newspapers mass appeal for not only upper but also middle and working class readers. It was through Reuters The reports of Abraham Lincoln's murder and its details reached Europe. Now we'll be talking about sensationalism and yellow journalism. In the late 1800s, New York World publisher Joseph Pulitzer, you may have heard about this prize titled Pulitzer. So, the Pulitzer Prize is given to all those journalists who excel in their field for excellent journalism. So this is the history, and this is a very strange history. So New York World publisher Joseph Pulitzer developed a new journalistic style that relied on intensified use of sensationalism, that is, all those stories focused on crime, violence and sex, violence, emotion and sex. Although he made major strides in the newspaper industry by creating an expanded section focusing on women and by pioneering the use of advertisements as use, Pulitzer relied largely on violence and sex in his headlines to sell more copies. So that is why I said earlier, this is a strange history, because a person who was behind all those sensationalist news gave the most, his name was given to the most prestigious award in journalism. So that is an irony. His New York World became famous for such headlines like "Baptized in Blood," "Little Lotta's Lover." And later this style was copied by his competitor William Randolph Hearst in his New York Journal to outsell each other. And then there was this Pulitzer-Hearst battle. The battle between these two major New York newspapers escalated as Pulitzer and Hearst attempted to outsell one another. This person, Hearst's life partially inspired one of the Hollywood's classic, Citizen Kane. So both these newspaper giants started battling with each other to increase their sale, and the papers slashed their prices back down to a penny. They did whatever they could. These papers reduced their prices to a penny. They even stole all those editors, all those reporters from each other. So they used all those unethical methods, filled their papers with outrageous and sensationalist headlines. And one conflict that inspired particularly sensationalized headlines was the Spanish-American War. Both Hearst and Pulitzer filled their newspapers with huge front-page headlines and gave bloody and inaccurate accounts of the war. So this sensationalist style served as the forerunner of today's tabloids. Editors relied on shocking headlines to sell their papers, and although this investigative journalism was predominant, editors often took liberties with how the story was told. Newspapers often printed an editor's interpretation of the story without maintaining any kind of objectivity. And stunt journalism was another feature of this period. So yellow journalism and yellow press are the American terms for journalism, and associated newspapers that present little or no legitimate, well-researched news. Instead, they used all those eye-catching headlines for increased sales. So the techniques they used included all those exaggeration of news events, scandal mongering, or sensationalism. And by extension, the term yellow journalism is used today as something like a pejorative, derogatory term to all those journalism that treats news in an unprofessional or unethical fashion. There was in 1896, Hearst New Journal published this R.F. Outcole's cartoon strip titled The Yellow Kid in an attempt to attract immigrant readers who otherwise might not have bought an English newspaper. So readers rushed to buy papers featuring those successful yellow nightshirt wearing character. So this cartoon, Yellow Kid, provoked a wave of gentle hysteria. And it started appearing on buttons, on tins, on cigarette packs and ladies' fans. So from there, it gets this name, yellow journalism or yellow press. So what defines yellow journalism? Frank Luther Mott identified yellow journalism based on 5 characters. They use this scary headlines in huge print, and it will be a minor news, but it uses all those scary headlines to attract the attention of the readers, and all those lavish use of pictures or imaginary drawings and use of faked interviews, misleading headlines, pseudoscience, and a parade of false learning from so-called experts. There is emphasis on full-color Sunday supplements, usually with comic strips. And they also try to project some kind of a dramatic sympathy with the underdog against the system. They try to, or they pretend that they are voicing out for the underprivileged people, but it is not usually the truth. So this is the basic difference between tabloid and broadsheet. So these are the two newspaper format. Tabloid are considered popular press, while broadsheets are considered serious or quality press. So here in tabloid, there is this mix of fact and emotion, while broadsheet it is more fact than emotion. And tabloid it is aimed at lower social groupings, while broadsheet it is aimed at higher social groupings. Tabloid will have a bold layout. There is color on the masthead. It will be easy to read, and they use a bold typeface, usually with all those large and dramatic images. While broadsheet, it has a plainer layout, usually no color or limited color on the front page, uses smaller typeface, small and subtle images. Tabloid contains all those shorter articles, it uses short sentences, while broadsheet have all those long articles and have long sentences. Tabloid uses lots of images and pictures, while broadsheet none or limited pictures. Tabloid it is less in-depth reporting. Broadsheet it is detailed and lengthy reports. Tabloid, as I said earlier, it focuses more on gossip stories, stories of celebrities, focus on famous people, their private lives and all those scandals. Broadsheet contain all those serious news, both international and political. So this is the size of tabloid, 11 into 17 inch, and the other one it is 11 to 12 into 20 inch. So the example of tabloid is Sun, as we said earlier, and Flash, as you know, it is a tabloid in Malayalam. Broadsheet, New York Times is a broadsheet, and Malayalam Manorama is a broadsheet. So this is the size of a tabloid. So look at the font. It uses all those bold font. It talks about sensational news. So this is a typical tabloid. There is this Berliner. Berliner is something like, it is also known as midi, something which comes in the middle of tabloid and broadsheet, which is slightly taller and marginally wider than the tabloid and is narrower and shorter than broadsheet format. So these are the different formats of newspapers. So here we end our discussions on the newspapers. So here we talked about the historical roots of modern newspaper. We talked about its beginning, the initial beginning in the ancient Roman times and its roots in Europe. And we talked about two major style used. It is, one is Dutch format, Corandos, and the other one is German style. We talked about the role of Benjamin Day, the first who created the first penny paper, the Sun. And then later we talked about the battle between Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. They were the major competitors in US newspaper industry. And to compete with one another, the two employed sensationalism to attract readers. So this type of journalism became known as yellow journalism. And yellow journalism is known for misleading stories, inaccurate information, and exaggerated detail. So here we end our discussions on the history and development of print media. I was trying to give a global perspective of the history and development of print media. Hope it is clear. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.